The session will be recorded and available afterwards to all registrants. Please enter your questions into the Q&A box. We'll get to them at the end of the presentations. And if we do not get to your question, please feel free to email us. So as I said, my name is Sheila Baker-Gujral, and I'm with the Association of New Jersey Environmental Commissions. We're a statewide organization that provides leadership, education, and support for environmental commissions and other local boards and public officials, and partners with other organizations to advocate for strong state and regional environmental policy. And then next slide, please. And our case study will be presented by Roberta Ezike, who is a graduate student at in Earth and Environmental Science at Rutgers Newark. And then we'll be hearing the main presentation from Jane Hamerman, the acting executive director at the Center for Creative Land Recycling, which is they pronounce their acronym CCLR, which I like, and Joelle Greenland, the senior program consultant for CCLR. And they'll be taking you through this Brownfields Development 101. So I'd like to thank you all for being here and presenting tonight. I'm really looking forward to this. There's a lot of information coming our way. So Jean, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much and welcome, and kudos for those of you who have joined us at 7 o'clock at night after your day at work, and we hope to make it really worth your while in terms of the information we can present and hopefully the relationships that we'll build with you following this presentation. So I'm with the Center for Creative Land Recycling. As Sheila said, we say CCLR or CCLR. We're actually a 23-year-old national organization. We're founded by the Trust for Public Land because the concept of preserving open space would require building in existing places. So hence looking at abandoned, underutilized, and brownfield properties for all the reasons that we look to those to revitalize our communities. So we educate, we advocate, we assist and convene stakeholders to revitalize communities. And we are the EPA's technical assistance to brownfield provider, or a TAB provider, for 10 states around the country, including New Jersey. Next. So what we do is to meet you where you're at. So people come to this work with a different level of knowledge and different priorities. So we can help you get started, stay on track, help you get the job done. We provide technical assistance, national webinars, workshops and conferences, newsletters, online resources. We have some people on staff who have been with us for 15 years, and we're just now beginning to see the vertical redevelopment from projects where we may have helped them get EPA grants 15 years ago. So as Joelle will share with you, what we're going to do today is really provide a framework so that you can see where to start and what it looks like at the end and the pathway to get there. Next. So we are going to launch a poll question just to get a sense of who's on with us tonight, because that will help us adjust some of our comments and have a better sense of who's with us. So tell us who you are. Easy question for 7 o'clock at night. You can answer if you wear multiple hats, you can answer more than once. So you can see there we have a municipality, green team, environmental commissioner, private consultant, elected official, not-for-profit, government agency, or other. So please vote so that we can share those results with you. All right, Sheila, are you ready to close the poll?
Okay, yes, we have about 90% have voted. So I will go ahead and end the poll and I will share the results. Can you see that?
Most environmental commissioners, that's great. Some consultants, not-for-profits, and green team members. Excellent. So the next poll really is just to get a sense of how you've interfaced with brownfields. So what is your experience with them? So is this new to you? You're just interested about the process? Do you know that you have some abandoned properties in your community that you're starting to address? Have you gone the next step and hired a licensed site remediation professional and looking to start remediating properties? Or have you actually had success and seen a property through to development or open space? So go ahead and vote, and we will share that and then move forward on the presentation. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to close out the poll in about 5 seconds if anybody else wants to vote. Okay. And I'm sharing the results.
All right, so it looks like the vast majority have had, for whom this is new, so that's great. You're in the right place, and some have some abandoned properties so that you know that you have some properties that you'd like to address. Excellent. So that's where we will start. So we're going to start at the beginning and just next slide, really talk about, what is a brownfield? And what's really important to understand a brownfield is that you can see what's in bold there, potential presence. It doesn't mean that it is necessarily contaminated. It may be an unknown whether it is or not. And so that's the definition. The expansion, development, or reuse could be maybe complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. And these properties, are an opportunity for funding and to put in your comprehensive plans, and you're looking at the opportunities, what the highest and best use of these properties are, so that they can contribute back to the tax rolls and other goals for the community. And they really come in all shapes and sizes. We'll see a bunch of pictures later, especially during our wonderful Maplewood presentation, where there's pictures of the different ones, but there are gas stations, there's strip malls, there are grocery stores, there are large factories, landfills, waterfront sites, and you can see here just what different examples of what they look at. And next, why we care about brownfields is because they're often unfenced, they could be dangerous, they could bring about additional criminal activity, they discourage investment, it can increase unemployment, diminishes quality of life, they impact adjacent property values, and it shows that there's lack of investment for economic growth in the area. So the reason we do it is because it does help create jobs, it brings new industries into municipalities, increases the tax base and the property values. EPA has done some research and found that for every dollar invested in brownfield redevelopment, it often leverages up to $18 in private investment. So there are opportunities to really bring in new investments into the communities, and environmentally, it reduces vehicle miles traveled, and so that impacts the carbon footprint, but as importantly, obviously, for public health and safety, it reduces some of the environmental and safety hazards. And quality of life, you can read there all the ways that it improves life. So why aren't these properties immediately redeveloped? And so developers really are looking at their prospective opportunities to what they want to invest in. And so we're looking at the time and cost uncertainties with brownfield redevelopment and concern about liability. And then under those descriptions, the first one is really the case where, because of zoning, you might be able to increase density, the height of the buildings, that the developer can pen out a profitable way to do the cleanup plus make their return. And so those deals are getting done. And then you go to the third option, and the cost of the cleanup far exceeds the property value. It may be in an area where there is, the rental cost or the cost of the real estate is not sufficient, or if they want to do mixed use, the rents don't support building it out, and those properties are then underwater. And so those are the ones that are going to need some public investment, and the ones where you as green team members, environmental commissioners, municipalities, elected officials are going to have to make some decisions about how to help support those redevelopment efforts. So where are they? What we're going to talk first about is doing an inventory. So that's just really making a list of the properties. And there are a number of people who may know where they are. local residents. You can interview people and they said, yeah, this property's been vacant X, this was the history, there used to be something there. And that's the kind of information that's really helpful. And obviously people at the municipal level, because of tax rolls and other information, often know where these properties are located. So what do you include when you do an inventory? The amount of information is really up to you, but you really need some basic information around the parcel data, the address, the block lot, the ownership, the size, ID. Helpful to have other pieces of information around zoning. If you know if there's been any assessment of if there is contamination, or if you know some of the prior uses, that's all helpful. If you have information about buildings on the site, any tax status, all of that is helpful. It's up to you, how much you need to put in and for the purpose of what you're going to do with the inventory. One of the things we'll hear from the Maplewood is, how you ground truth properties, so you can get a report, but whether those are active brownfield sites or not often can be determined by actually visiting the site. So how do you prioritize a site? Obviously, if it's not an immediate health and safety risk, which would obviously jump that to the top, many people prioritize it by the redevelopment potential. So if you think this is one that you can get off the rolls and get redeveloped and have it find its best and highest use by finding a developer, that is often a heavier weight. But there are any other number of priorities that you can identify by talking to the community, so that you can take your list of inventory sites, go through them, and apply a mathematical formula or quantitative or qualitative formula by looking at the community needs and goals, to decide which ones you want to prioritize. And so the reason you would prioritize it is that it's part of a planning tool. You are then involving the community and making decisions about the reuse process. And then you can think about how you market those sites, how you might want to attract funding or grant or invest in some infrastructure in and around that site to make it more attractive. So there's any number of ways that you can use the prioritized inventory to lead an effective campaign to advance those sites. And here's just an example of a matrix where you have, the name of the site. This they used to prioritize the hazard, the human or economic disadvantage, the potential development potential, the blight reduction, owner, and they gave different weightings to it. They came up with scores. You can see there's a block, lot, address, and information about development status and environmental status. And now I am going to turn the presentation over to Joelle, who's going to kind of take us back a little and give us a whole framework, because how you want to finish up is often how you start. So she's going to take us through the whole process.
You're muted, Joelle.
You think you have everything checked off. Thank you, Jean, and thank you everyone for coming out, 7:18 now. So the framework of a brownfield, as 53% of you indicated, this is new to you, but 32% said you have some experience with this. So some of you are aware of some of these trajectories and flow charts, and a lot of this you can see at the very beginning, the site identification and visioning end use. I can't stress enough, I've been doing brownfields for over 25 years, and the most successful projects always start with a really, really good, solid vision and a great team. So knowing what you would like to do in that place, in that site, is really important. It will feed into all the other steps. So knowing what, determining how your revitalization goals align with the brownfields in your community is really important. So that inventory is a really great planning tool so that you can understand what you have in order to know where to start. And so you would have on this top row of arrows and boxes, you have that environmental remediation flow. And below that, concurrently, you're going to be constantly thinking about the redevelopment assessment, the market study, that vision, the design, and this will fluctuate. This plan needs to be dynamic, such that you can pivot if things go different. You might find some different contamination, or you might find results that pave the way for redevelopment really fast. You might find funding has landed in your lap and you need to get something really quickly moving. And that's another reason why the inventory is so important too. So who is also very important. You need a champion. Honestly, I don't think I've ever seen a successful redevelopment done without someone who is a champion for the project and who keeps things moving forward. So making sure you have the right team together and creating a clear community vision is essential. If you don't have local buy-in, this can be a real snag in the future when the community feels that they haven't been part of the discussion or at the table. So let's talk about community involvement. So who are your stakeholders? Really important to identify this right from the get-go. This would include your elected officials and residents, citizens, groups, local nonprofits. Think about your CDCs, NGOs, neighborhood organizations, people who are really active in the community, but also residents too, adjacent owners, your planners, not only local, but regional, and businesses are extremely important. And also your financial and economic development institutions, really, really key players to be creating that team, if you will, your dream team, to make sure that everybody is on the same page with visioning and needs and expectations. So I think we've already gotten into this, and I think a lot of you understand why you would engage the community members, but it always serves to go over it one more time, because without community buy-in, you can hit a lot of barriers. So you want the community to feel that everything's transparent and that they always have a seat at the table. So that can be done through a website or emails or charrettes, public meetings, and just making sure people are aware and have that outlet, if you will, to ask questions and to provide input. So elected officials and business representatives may not fully understand, the community's interests and their interests. Making sure everybody is on the same page is really key. You don't want, one of the biggest things that developers, I've heard over and over and over again, is they love predictability. So when anything is a hiccup or there's a bump in the road, they don't like that. So they like to have a lot of predictability so that there are no delays in construction costs, or if there's tax credits, negative media coverage, any of these things, you want to make sure that you're ahead of, right? So, and you also want to think about the project in and of itself to make sure that you're not biting off more than you can chew and that it is really feasible, right? That if you have the buy-in or if you don't have the buy-in, maybe you need to pivot and go to a different site on your inventory that may not be the catalytic project that you hope to have started, but maybe the small win will build that momentum for other wins. So, and this is also very, very important to note. When you have community buy-in, it makes your future grant applications that much stronger. You will rise to the top of that pile of potential winner when you show a very, very strong community input and a team cohesive, united front effort. So that's the middle part as far as the community, the visioning process, but integrating that along with the cleanup and the redevelopment, right? So at first, you want to know what's there, right? A phase 1, phase 2, that's your environmental due diligence. And I can't stress enough the importance of doing your environmental due diligence. And this is what's called an all appropriate inquiry on the federal level. It's a phase 1 essentially, but not all phase 1s are all appropriate inquiries. So definitely work in New Jersey with your LSRP as far as environmental due diligence. But that is basically everything above the ground, phase 1. Phase 2 is when you get below the ground. So you're going to do samplings and try to investigate all the recognized environmental concerns that are vetted out in a phase 1, right? So they might say, hey, this used to be an auto body shop or a gas station. And someone say, auto, petroleum, oil, possible. So those are what they would recognize as RECs, right? They would classify them as. And then those are investigated further through a phase 2. So as you can see here from this flow chart, once you know what's there, then you can do an analysis and then you can understand the risks, but you also, it goes into what you're going to redevelop will also marry with your cleanup, such that if you've got hot spots or things that can do in situ, which means they can do natural attenuation, which means the hazardous waste or the contaminants can actually be there, the levels are low enough that they can stay on site. And maybe it's you put a parking lot on top, which acts as a cap. These are some of the simple things that you can do in a redevelopment process that will save you a lot of money when you're redeveloping the property, and also killing 2 birds with 1 stone, if you will. Okay, so all the while you're also thinking about risk management and liability, and so there's a lot of things happening, which is always why it's nice to have a roadmap of redevelopment. So you're keeping track of everything so that when various things happen, you know how to pivot and address it. So this is a fantastic roadmap from NJIT. It's the New Jersey Brownfields regulatory process. And as you can see here, it does a lovely map of everywhere, starting with an LSRP, the licensed site remediation professional in the state of New Jersey. So the Department of Environmental Protection basically has given that power, if you will, and transferred it to the LSRPs in New Jersey. And they help get you through the preliminary assessments, the site investigations, all those things that I was just talking about, the remedial investigation, and basically walks you through all the regulatory processes that you need to, checking all those boxes so that you're doing everything and not skipping a step. And of course, the RAWP, the Remedial Action Work Plan, what you need to do to get the site to the level that you need it at, depending on the redevelopment plan. So if it's residential, it's going to have a higher cleanup. If it's industrial, whether it's industrial 1 or 2, heavy industrial, commercial, office, are there environmental covenants? Are there institutional controls? All these things go into the remedial action work plan, as well as your operations and maintenance. So after everything's developed, what needs to still continue to happen on the site if it's necessary. And then, of course, the response, action, outcome, and of course, the process is complete. That's the Willy Wonka ticket, right? So the trajectory of a brownfields redevelopment, if we were to all, to put everything that I just said in a nice, clean trajectory, this is what it looks like, right? Your EPA brownfield grants to help with the assessment, evaluation, planning, remediation, even demolition, asbestos abatement, repositioning as far as incentives and opportunity zones, rezoning or fast track permitting process. There's a lot of non-monetary incentives that I can't stress enough that really attract developers. If you have a fast track permitting process, that will give you the extra edge over the next municipality that doesn't have that. And the developer gets, well, it may, the permit may be 180 days, but the faster you can, and the more concrete that the developer knows, hey, in 90 days, I'm going to get my permit and I'll be able to start my project right on time. Time is money to a developer. So, and then it goes to vertical development, right? It's what we all want to see. And then it's back on the tax roll and it's a productive use, the environment, and all the things that Jean was talking about, which is why we redevelop brownfields, which essentially are real estate transactions with an environmental twist, right? But as lovely as this trajectory is, the reality of brownfields redevelopment is that you will have forwards, backwards, sideways. You'll think I'm getting nowhere, and then all of a sudden you're going, great guns, and then you hit a hiccup. I will say, after doing this for a long time, there are no lost causes. Every brownfields deserves a second act, and they all have second acts in them. It's just whether or not you have a champion to get them to the finish line. So layering funds and technical assistance, having your capital stacks and layering things is really, really important. Knowing how to leverage funds as well as resources is essential for a successful redevelopment project. So you have your general funds and your local tools. I've mentioned a few of them. Then you have your federal sources of funding, EPA, EDA, HUD, CDBG, tax credits and incentives, tax incremental financing, TIF, opportunity zones, other zones that you might have. CDFA, Council of Development Finance Associations, is always a great resource. And of course, as Jean mentioned, your technical assistance to brownfield communities. These are also, with respect to assessment, cleanup, and redevelopment resources, a bunch of resources here that address some of the purposes in the right-hand column. And I will say that if you have historic buildings, there's historic credits, and getting involved with your state historic preservation officer is always an excellent idea at the very beginning. That can take a very long time. So making sure they're in the loop from the very beginning is extremely important. So insurance is also one of these things that has been coming up as far as policies from past owners. And of course, we've talked about the EPA programs. Attracting investment. So you want to identify developers to purchase the property, but you also want to make sure that you have all your incentives and all the bells and whistles out for your property that you want to get redeveloped. You want to make sure that they understand that they're not in it by themselves, and that you're there to help them through the process, through the permitting process, finding funding. I've done a lot of projects where we've actually had a situation where we would lease and then to own. So we have a contract, where the developer would actually be leasing the property, but a nonprofit or those that are eligible for certain grants would still have control of the site. And then that lease would then turn over to the developer when all those incentives kind of ran out. So, marketing sheets are huge. If there's anything, we also help with that in property sheets. We do a lot of those for our municipalities and people who we assist with technical assistance, data on local market conditions, economic analysis, impacts, market information, especially when you're doing an inventory. It's always good to try to rate your sites as far as economic impact, information on environmental assessments, letting the developer know what the vision is, getting it out there. Sometimes people can't vision what that is. So, and what funds municipalities have done. If you've already done an assessment and you've done some demolition or taken away, let them know that funds have been spent and that you've got skin in the game and you really are a partner in this. So, and one of the other things is working with your economic development authority. Absolutely. Foster as many relationships as possible. Without partnerships and relationships, redevelopment just does not happen. You have to have those partnerships. They are essential. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Roberta, who's going to tell us all about a wonderful case study and inventory that she did in Maplewood, New Jersey. Roberta?
Thank you, Joelle. Hi, everyone. My name is Roberta. I'm a current master's student at Rutgers Newark. And this past season, I did an inventory with Maplewood on brownfields that we have. And so the mission for creating the inventory, it was to create an inventory of possible brownfields in Maplewood, New Jersey. And the purpose was to explore opportunities for green and open spaces. And so here's a map of Maplewood, New Jersey, and a little bit about Maplewood, New Jersey. There's 25,000 inhabitants, maybe more or less, and it's only about less than 4 square miles. So it's considered a small town. Yeah. And in the next slide, I show a zoning map of Maplewood, New Jersey. And this zoning map I used to help me in creating the inventory. And as you can see in the, Joelle can go back. As you can see in the zoning map, the areas highlighted in orange are like the places where I found the bulk of my brownfields, and they were included in my inventory. So having the zoning map was really helpful in just identifying what zones these brownfields were in. And so in creating the inventories, here are some of the sources that I used and the steps taken. So the number one source that I used was the NJDEP, the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection data miner site. And so that site has just a bunch of properties that have known and suspected sites, known and suspected contaminated sites, just all of them like listed in the site on the website. And so I used that to just go through all of the possible brownfields in Maplewood. And then I also used maps, different maps. I used Google Maps as an initial source to just get a lay of the land of what was going on certain properties. And I also used ArcGIS, a special map using a Maplewood Township layer, just to see, which also has extra information on the type, the zoning, and like the block and plot, just to see like what specific information what the specific information about each property. And then also I used a parcel finder by Rowan University, which gives an aerial view of each property. And then I also used the Monmouth County's tax county record database, and that database has just has like county records for possibly all properties in New Jersey. So whichever county you're in, you could use it for whichever whatever city or town that you're located in. And then I also did site visits, which was a very important part of creating my inventory. And so this is what the NJDEP data miner site looks like. This I use to just look through just gather a list of sites that were or are possibly contaminated. And then with each site, I did further investigation on the property. And then in the next slide, these are the maps that I used. This is what they look like. ArcGIS, Maplewood Township layer map, Google Earth, and then the Rowan University parcel finder map. And in the next slide, this is the tax county records database that I was talking about earlier. You could use this for any county in New Jersey. And I used Maplewood, of course, to find the ownership information on each property and the lot and building size. So this was definitely very useful. And in the next slide, this is just a visual of how my inventory looked like. And so as you can see, I included the address, lot size, building size, the zoning, the ownership information, any LSRPs that were assigned to the properties, the PI number, which is the program interest number, and that's used by the NJDEP just to identify the specific property. And so that was useful for me to have, so that whenever I wanted to go back and to refer to the specific property, I can just plug that number in and the property would pop up automatically. And then I also included some notes about the property as well. I found that as I was doing the inventory, I would go back to a specific site just to go back to a specific site just to see, okay, whether this property was actually a brownfield or whether I was missing any other information that I needed to include in the inventory. And as you can see, I have 2 sheets as well. So the first sheet on the bottom shows the brownfields property, and on the next sheet, I listed properties that weren't actually brownfields, but I kept it on the list just in case I came upon those properties again. And so if I did, I would know, okay, I already looked over this property, and I put it on a separate sheet just to remind myself so that I know that this isn't really considered a brownfield, or this wouldn't really be included in my main inventory. And then I added some notes next to the property, including why I didn't include it. And so next slide, and in the next slide, I took pictures of the properties that were on my inventory. And this is where I did my site visits. And then as you can see, this is just an empty lot. It's on a main avenue in Maplewood. And as you can see, I also include information, a little bit about the property. It's across the street from a Papa John's that was running. It's no longer running anymore, but as you can see, it's an empty lot. Previously, it was a gas station, but it's no longer a gas station anymore. It's a current active DEP case. There on the data miner site, it says that there was some known contamination, and this was definitely included in my inventory. So next property. This is another property. It wasn't on the data miner site, but I did include it in my inventory because one of the purposes of this inventory for Maplewood was to identify sites that were underutilized. And so this is definitely one of the sites that I found on my own field visits. And I figured this would be something that Maplewood would be interested in pursuing further. It's an empty lot. Previously, it was a parking lot, but it's no longer used as a parking lot anymore. And so this is one of those properties that I included on my inventory. And in the next slide, this is one of my favorite sites, only because it's, I guess it's one of those sites that are like your typical brownfields. It's a plot of land. It's right next to a residential area, and then on the left side, it's next to a industrial area, and just a lot is going on this property. The data miner site says that there's multiple sources of contamination. Just even as I believe like 5 years ago, there was a house that was on this property, and then it was demolished. So just a lot going on, and a lot of contamination on this property. It's right next to the Maplewood Department of Public Works Center. So yeah, as you can imagine, there's just a bunch of like contamination going on here. And so this was definitely one of those sites that needed to be included in the inventory. And right now there's work being done to remediate it. So, but it hasn't happened yet. It's definitely early on in the remediation process. So yeah. In the next slide, you can see this property was in an industrial area of Maplewood. So, and I found this to be one of the buildings that were abandoned. There used to be a business here, but now it's no longer in use. It's totally empty. In my investigation, I found out it's totally empty. No one uses it as anything anymore. There's even a sign posted on the door saying that the company is moved. And so right now it's just empty, laying empty. No one's doing anything with it. And there has been some contamination on this property in the past. And so I included it in the inventory. And then this was another property right next to the previous property shown. It's just a garage, an empty garage. I don't believe, when I did my site investigation, I actually ran through this property twice. I didn't see anyone going in and out of it, unlike the other properties in this region. And even on Google Maps, there was a police car camped out in front of it. So little things like that pretty much clued me into thinking, okay, maybe this isn't really being used for anything. So this I definitely included in my inventory. So, and then this is a old dry cleaners laundromat that recently closed. And so this is definitely one of those properties that would be included in a inventory because of, like the contamination that would come from it. And it's a permanently closed business, recently added to the DEP website. And so this was one of those properties that I figured had to be on my inventory. It's something that I believe Maplewood should pursue further, if anything. And then this is another property on one of the largest avenues in Maplewood, and an empty plot for sale right across the gas station. I didn't find it or see it on the data miner site, but I figured it may have some contamination. I'm not exactly sure yet, but I mean, this has been like this for quite some time now, and I figured Maplewood again would be interested in pursuing this property for other uses. So that's why it was included in my inventory. And then this property did not initially pop up in my research. I did see this address actually in the suspected contaminated sites on the data miner website, but when I popped it into Google Maps, I didn't actually see the actual property. I saw a house in front of it instead. And so, and as you can see, like in the aerial view, you can see like the property is actually landlocked. So on Google Maps, you wouldn't really see it from the street. So it's a property that's in between other houses and other properties. But because of one of the sources that I use, which was actually given to me by one of the Maplewood Environmental Advisory Committee members, he gave this to me, and he gave this property to me and the source in the map to me to actually do my own research on it. And then I was able to find that, okay, this is actually a real property that exists. And so I was able to put this in my inventory. And so, yeah, so it was found to have a known source or lease with groundwater contamination. And then the next property is another property similar to the last one. It's another landlocked property, and I didn't find it, it wasn't in my initial research until this property was given to me by a committee member who's from Maplewood. And so I found it very helpful to have input from other people who live in the town of Maplewood to provide input and help me with the inventory. Yeah. And so this is just the view that I could actually get of the previous property. So in between the houses, you can see like a brown building, and then there's some windows that are broken out of it. And so, definitely it does look underutilized, kind of abandoned. And so I was able to get that little snippet and then put it in my inventory. And then in the next slide, this is a huge block of land. Actually, the next slide as well is part of this property, and it's all owned by the same person, as I recently found out from another Maplewood Township member, Environmental Committee Township member. And so this entire plot of land is on like one of the biggest avenues in Maplewood, and it's just like laying empty. There's even a building in between those two empty lots, and it's abandoned. So definitely underutilized. Definitely a blight on the street, because when you look around the entire street, there's thriving businesses going on, and then you look here, it's just an empty building and then a huge plot of land that's not being used for anything. And so this was included in my inventory as well. And then that was everything for my inventory, and this would not have been possible without the input and help from a bunch of people from Maplewood, and special people from the Maplewood Township Advisory Committee, and then also the project manager for NGIT, and then Sheila Baker-Gujral, the Resource Center Director at ANJEC. So definitely having their input was integral for me in completing this inventory and presenting this to you guys today.
Thank you, Roberta. That was fabulous. I mean, it was just very valuable to go through it on so many levels. First, in that the end product was an inventory, and you got the input of a number of people. So you added and subtracted people based on different reports you got, based on input you got about different properties, and that you actually went and visited the sites. That's the way to do it, and that was a tremendous benefit to Maplewood. Also, that you really model how to go about doing this. So for those of you who are on green teams or with municipalities, that really exemplified a process of really finding out, what's on the list, and then through some due diligence, coming up with a resultant list that are your sites that need some consideration. And from that, you can go through the prioritization. I just wanted to make sure that those of you on the call are familiar with Sustainable Jersey, and there are 4 brownfield actions as part of their certification program. The 4 include inventory and prioritization, and if you go to their website, which is listed there, there is information about why undertake these different actions and provide you with resources to do so, and then what would be required to get actual points for certification. So this will take you through how to conduct an inventory and how to prioritize, how to market a site, what evidence we would need that you've actually tried to identify a developer for a site, documents you would need to do through the council or the legislative body of the municipality to show that you've undertaken planning reuse. And the last and newest one is the assessment and investigation. So reports that the LSRP that you would hire to start conducting assessments of the potential contamination of the site would be submitted for points for that as well. So I really encourage you to look at the Sustainable Jersey. Whether you get points or not, use the documents that are there as guidelines to begin your work wherever you are in your redevelopment process. And the next slide is just to make sure that you know that CCLR and ANJEC work together on developing a 2021 edition of Remediating and Redeveloping Brownfields in New Jersey, a guide for municipalities and community organizations. And certainly we can either chat that as a resource, or as we send out the recording, we'll send the link to that document, and we suggest you take a look. It's not anything you're going to sit down and read all in one sitting, because it has a lot of information and resources, but definitely sort of something to keep on your desktop as a conversation item and a reference document. So providing there my information and Joelle's information, should you have any questions about or want to find out more about CCLR services and how we can support your efforts with some free technical assistance.
Thank you. Thank you all for all that. And a special thank you for the help on that new resource, which we will be sending out along with our thank you email. We'll be sending out that resource plus a link to a recording of this webinar. And then there was one other thing. I'm not remembering what it is. Oh, then also a PDF of the slide deck we will also be sharing with you. So just to get into the questions, I have two here that are related, so I'm going to ask them together. It's how do I find an LSRP, and what if I can't afford it? And then the follow-up is, if I can't afford an LSRP, can I do an inventory myself? Which I think Roberta has, demonstrated to us. But if you could address that, that would be great. So Joelle or Jean, how do you go?
LSRP is a licensed site remediation professional. There's an association, so you can go and try to identify the right fit. There are probably resources, or we could support you in terms of what questions you would ask to interview somebody to make sure you're finding someone who is a good fit for your community. You want to get prices and to make sure the work scope is the right step, but they are licensed in the state of New Jersey, so they come with the qualifications you need to start performing your different reports around assessment. But as you saw with the work of Green Team members and volunteers and graduate students, at least the initial part of finding the properties can be conducted with such a team.
So I have another question here. How do I deal with difficult or absent property owners who want nothing to do with redeveloping a property that is a priority for economic development?
Yeah, that's a great question. I find that most times that property owners are difficult is because it's based in fear of the unknown, fear of the process, and honestly, being on the hook for tens of thousands of dollars, if that's the issue. So having a conversation that is, and making sure that the intention is, there's a bigger issue here. We're not trying to come after you as far as, here's your bill. We're trying to start a conversation about redeveloping this property. And we would like you to be having have a seat at the table to have just a conversation about this, and doing it in such a non-threatening way that makes them feel that you're just exploring the options. We have done that in public settings where it's a community meeting and inviting these owners, or reaching out in a letter that just says, this is our Brownfields program, or we're trying to start this and we would like, to hear from you. So I think as much as it's to be non-threatening and to be more of collaborate, that's, and just keep keep going after. Don't do just one email or a letter. Keep going and talk to an adjacent owner. You never know who someone else knows, and then you stumble upon someone who knows that difficult owner and says, oh, well, I can talk to them for you, or I can bring them to a meeting. So talking to as many people as possible is really key. You just never know where a connection will lead.
So I have a question here. It says, we have a site that was a coal gas plant, is now being cleaned by NJNG, which I guess is New Jersey Natural Gas, but it is not clear if at the end of it, it will be open to reuse. I asked DEP about it, but haven't received an answer. Does NJNG clean sites as a rule such that they become available for reuse, or is it only partially done so that it doesn't leach out contaminants to the periphery?
That you'd have to look at on a case by case. I know that in New York State, there was recently an RFP issued to find teams of people who could consult with municipalities that had power plants, in their jurisdictions to help them identify reuse options. So a lot does depend on the ownership and the intention of that owner in terms of future uses of that property. So it is absolutely, it'd be worth having a dialogue with the owner of the property to see what they're doing, what their intentions are, how the community could be involved in its reuse visioning, because there are higher and best uses of those plants. The property can be segmented and something could happen on one side. You may have a solar array on other property. It goes back to, as Joelle was saying, what is the highest and best use, and how much are you going to invest in cleaning it up for what end use purpose. So obviously residential will cost you the most in terms of the cleanup process, but it does depend on what the reuse is. But I would not give up on power plants, especially under this new administration. There is a re-emphasis in a way that we haven't seen in years on environmental justice, connecting land reuse to renewable energy and climate. So if that plant is being cleaned up and it's being decommissioned and isn't being used in any way, there may be more incentives and more money and more opportunities to really leverage and take advantage of that site. So you should be ready to go with a fact sheet about the site and to see what kind of interest you could get through some local champions, through your government officials, elected officials, to say, yeah, this is part of our downtown comprehensive plan. It's located on a strategic site. Maybe it's on a waterfront, maybe it's somewhere else. And I would not give up on that site.
So I have a question here from Doug Trainer. Do all contaminated sites need to be capped if it's too expensive to dig out the contaminations? Are there other options?
It's a great question. And I'm gonna say it depends. Capping is one of those options, alternatives, if you will. It depends based upon what you have there. If you're talking that there's a threat to public health and safety, and it can't have natural attenuation on site without leaching out to the groundwater or to the air or the soil, and then, yes, those soils then would need to be removed. If you can keep stuff on site, obviously that's a lot cheaper than, shipping it off and sending it to the, right facility. There are incinerators, there are soils that have, dioxin or PCBs, that stuff, trying to keep that on site. That is why it is so important to know what your end use is, to work with the DEP, your LSRP also, to understand what's there, what can stay, and what has to be removed, just so that all the regs are checked. But no, Doug, not every site has to be capped. So it really depends what's there. So unfortunately, although I don't want to say it depends, it really does, not knowing exactly what's there. There's all different options. So capping is just one.
Just to very briefly say, there are EPA assessment and cleanup grants will be going into around probably in September, October. If you think you may be interested in applying for one, that would help you assess an area or a specific site, or to apply for a cleanup grant, then you should be talking to us now. And we recently just did a webinar, I think 2 weeks ago, for those who want to jump on it and kind of find out about the process. There are things that you can start doing now that will position you for better grant success. So there are opportunities, and there's going to be a lot of other funding opportunities. And so now is the time to identify your sites, prioritize your sites, find the champion, and really engage the public. So that you're well positioned for when the deluge of federal funding comes through the infrastructure bill and some of these other bills that are pending and general appropriations, that you're ready to take advantage of it.
Yeah. Dovetailing off of that, I cannot stress enough, starting months in advance about thinking about EPA grants, having secured quite a number of them myself. Think about the story, not just the site, how the site envelops the whole story of the community, and how redeveloping it, how the EPA money will help to then bring this property into a use that will give back to the community. You want a really good story, and that takes time to develop, and you want to have community involvement and stakeholders that are all in it with a united front, and that comes clearly through the grant. And so that's why you really need a lot of time to build up that story. It's never going to happen. These are too competitive for you to just think you can put it together in 2 months. It's not going to happen.
So you had mentioned at some point fast tracking. How can you fast track permits for this process? How does that work?
Sure. We did this out in Colorado, and basically we provided a separate system whereby a permit that came in on a property that was identified in our brownfields inventory in our area, if it was identified as a brownfield, it would be to the top of the line, if you will, and then we would have special convening meetings of these fast-tracked properties, and those would have a separate system in which they would have a streamlined system that basically had already a calendar of when they would be heard before the development, the planning commission, and getting the engineering's approval and public works, and all the people would be in line knowing that this was coming through on a fast track. So it's really the step one is bringing all your departments together and saying, if we want to do this fast track process, and this can be for brownfields and for affordable housing projects, which is a great combination, that you talk and see how you can actually streamline your current process, because why not do it for all your permits if you could, right? So a lot of it is putting it online, and our system was not online, and we put it all online such that all the applications could be done from, virtually, if you will. And it was fantastic. And in fact, because of that system, it was called a one-stop shop. We actually got more developers in Adams County than the city and county of Denver. So because developers, we quickly got a reputation of there was predictability, and that if you put in your application on June 1st, you were going to get your permit 90 days later or earlier. And that quickly got out. So every little edge that you can get will get you that much farther.
So I have a question for Roberta. What was the most challenging part of putting together your inventory, and what did you find the most helpful?
I guess the most, well, I'll start with the most helpful. The most helpful part of putting together my inventory was definitely the input from township residents. So I definitely got a lot of help from the Maplewood Environmental Advisory Committee. They were the ones who gave me some sites to look into. For example, the dry cleaner that closed up and some of the landlocked properties that I had no access to while doing my own field visits. And I also worked with one of the project managers at NJIT's Brownfield Center, and she was definitely very integral and very helpful in putting together my Brownfield inventory. So definitely, I guess helping or working with someone who has experience in working on brownfields would be definitely really a good thing or resource to have. And I think the most difficult part of putting together my inventory was, I mean, it was a very long process because I had to double and triple check my work just to see if like some of the properties were actual brownfields or just to see if some of these properties would be of use or of interest to the township of Maplewood. But I think it was just going through the data miner site. It's quite a interesting site to use in the sense that it's not super user friendly, but you have to know what you're looking for to be able to navigate it. So navigating the data miner site was, I think, the most difficult part for me. But after getting input and help from Melissa, who's one of the project managers at NJIT's Brownfield Center, it was smooth sailing from there. So.
Great. And then I have one last question. How do we attract developers, investors for these properties? Sorry, Joelle, you're muted.
No, I'm looking at Jean.
Yeah, you're like,
So, I mean, we had the slide and I think that tried to help. So I think there's a number of ways to think about that. One is to have information about the site. So compile information. Developers need to be able to find it. So you need to think about what you're putting together that's available and where you're making that information available.
Yeah.
To the extent that you have your community visioning and planning documents already done, you know what the community will accept, you know how you're going to move forward. Again, as Joelle said, time and money are really the critical factors. So you want to talk to you want your mayor and your elected officials to talk to other people around Jersey saying, who have you brought in? We want to do an affordable housing project. We want to do this kind of project. Who have you worked with? And you want to be able to create your own list of developers that you can reach out to and tap. You might want to put out an RFP, a request for proposal, where you're laying out, what the situation is and look for a master developer. So it goes back to planning, the championing, as Joelle spoke about. That's really your 1 and 2 critical items for attracting development. And then, if the property is underwater because the cost of remediation is such, you need to think of ways to make the developer whole. Either you have to add density so they can build more units, or you need to get an EPA grant if you own the property and help clean that up. So that lowers their costs. So you need to really understand what the financial factors of that is, of the property are.
I think coming from the public sector, having been in county government and also a regional planning commission, I think one of the most important things to attract a developer is having a really excellent reputation of customer service and getting that reputation of being able to keep your word on even the smallest permits. So developing a great reputation, the word's out on the street, because time and time again, when we populated a website, so most developers are going to do desktop research, right? They're going to get on there and do their own research and go, I'm interested in Maplewood. Oh, look, Maplewood has a website and it even has a Brownfields program tab, and I'm going to look at, oh, look at this lovely inventory, right? And as soon as we put our inventory up on our webpage with the brownfields, inviting people, making it very approachable, the developers then saw, right, from all the planning commission meetings, whether we kept our promise to other developers. And word on the street got out that we delivered. Time and time again, we delivered, and it was easy to work with us. When you get a reputation for not being easy to work with, developers will go to the next place where it's all about their hurdle rate, their money in, and when they can get it out. So make it really friendly. Start the conversations. That's how you attract developers.
Oh, great. Well, I'd like to thank you all. Thank you, Jean and Joelle and Roberta, for being here and sharing all of your wealth of information. And thank you, everybody out there in webinar land, for showing up for the webinar. And if you weren't able to see it, then maybe you're seeing the recording. We'll get the recording up soon, and you'll receive a link for it in your email. All right. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Good luck to
night.
you.
Thank
Please
you.
be in touch if you have any questions.
Yep.
I am.